Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome to FoundFlix. On this video, we're going to be diving into the new HBO Max exclusive show, Station 11, where 20 years after a flu pandemic resulted in the collapse of civilization, a group of survivors who make their living as traveling performers do their best to rebuild and reimagine the world anew, while holding on to the best of what's been lost. First off, let me thank HBO Max for sponsoring this video. If you want to check out Station 11 and a whole bunch of other great stuff, make sure to sign up today. Sure, there's a lot of streaming services out there, but come on, it's HBO. They're always at the top of the heap, especially when it comes to original content. I'm glad to say that Station 11 continues this grand tradition because I ended up really loving the show. Unlike the usual setup with full rundowns of the plots, today we'll be focusing more on the show's grander themes and concepts that define the story. So far, I've seen 3 episodes out of 10 total. It's a mini-series supposedly, but we'll see about that. The impressive thing is how it keeps building and fleshing out its world with each installment, and it really feels like it gets more intriguing with each episode. My only real regret was not having the whole thing to binge in one go, because, that would have been ideal. It makes you want to go right on to the next episode. There's a lot of stuff to appreciate about the show, and as I started watching it, I was trying to classify it. Just what is the genre? My first thought was science fiction, but there's nothing fictional about a global pandemic, so, that didn't really seem to fit. I guess the safest bet is post-apocalyptic, because that is definitely the case here. But now this isn't an action piece, it's a lot more pensive and character driven, which makes it really stand out as its own thing. To try and really all wrap it up together, it feels like an indie post-apocalyptic character piece with some very strong mystery elements as well. It's got a very distinct vibe that really works for me with how its story is driven and unfolds. On top of that, there's a lot of interesting themes and ideas at play, the kind of grander ideas that it's tackling. These two develop and are enriched with each episode. A big idea really at the core of the show is looking at art as a concept and its many different incarnations and intentions. Perhaps most importantly is how this relates to our traveling group of theatrical performers 20 years after the epidemic that reshaped the world. It becomes about how we rebuild into something new as well as remembering what we had before. And in this relatively primitive new society, entertainment has taken on a familiar cyclical form, as our new group of performers is essentially a group of traveling minstrels or troubadours from way back in the medieval times. Back then, this was how stories and music would travel around the land. Since there was no TV or any other form of entertainment really. This was in many ways the birth of theater as we know it, and it makes sense that after the apocalypse, with things starting over from scratch, that the troubadours would make a return. How else would people be entertained in this new environment? But it also represents the importance of performance, of art, of theater. The people need it. It's an escape. That is a lot of what makes art what it is, providing a story to take people's attention away from their own menial and sometimes painful existences. It's also meant to elicit a catharsis from the audience, which traces all the way back to Greek theater, again, kind of the whole origin of this idea. Already in the show, it's well established that there are many sides of the arts, and it has incredible importance to many of our characters. For Kirsten, who we see in time jumps both at day 0 as an 8-year-old Shakespearean actor, as well as the lead in the traveling troupe 20 years later, it's all that ever mattered to her. As a kid, she was already working professionally, pretty impressive, but it seems that her parents are very distant and don't really care about her. The only one who mattered to her was Arthur, the lead in King Lear, in which she performed. Then as she loses everyone thanks to the outbreak, all she really has left is Shakespeare and acting. Those were the highlights of her life, so good thing the new group exclusively performs the Bard. There's a momentous scene in episode 2 that really hammers the entire concept home here, where they are performing Hamlet, and we really appreciate the amount of loss that Kirsten has experienced. It's contrasted with words from the play about Hamlet's own grief. It's not simply one emotion, but an array of many feelings that never leave her. Not something so easily defined as just grief. This is cut between her as a child trying to reach her parents, only to get an emotionalist text back that her parents' phones were found and they're dead. No goodbye, no catharsis for her. This ultimately brings her even closer to her performing talents than ever before. The theater troupe in the future essentially becomes her new family, because that is all she has. We also know somewhere along the way she lost her helpful brothers from day 0, Frank and Javine, but we haven't exactly seen what happened to them yet. More mysteries! Next we move on to Miranda's very different perspective of art and its importance. She's first introduced as an idealistic youngster scribbling astronauts in her sketchbook. For her, art isn't something that she wants fame or accolades for. It's a much more personal journey. She's using art as a way to deal with her own personal trauma. Again, we don't know the specifics, but at one point on day 0, she's asked about a family and reveals that she has none. So you know something happened there. She's using her art as a way to deal with her own grief. This is all thrown for a loop when she happens to run into famous actor Arthur, and she's swept into his intoxicating web. This too speaks to her character. She's willing to take a risk and follow a different path because she's looking for something that she doesn't have. Also, her art is secondary to her main life. She has a job in logistics that she's very good at, but she doesn't feel that this defines who she is. It's just work, as many artists can relate to. They're just doing it on the side. Even though she's constantly jetting off to various countries to seal deals, and it does consume most of her daily existence, that is not what matters to her most of all. Of course, sometime later, after Arthur and Miranda are married, mostly for his own public opinion, she figures out Arthur is having an affair. What's really interesting is how this too affects her work. Many artists include real-life encounters and dialogue in their stuff, and so it stands to reason that this big moment of her life works its way into the Station 11 comic. I mean, this was the point of the comic in the first place, which she has been working on well before she met Arthur. It's just that she now has a new traumatic event to deal with. It's also made clear during the dinner party where she uncovered their infidelity that she didn't really want anyone to see her work until it's finished. Arthur at points accuses her of never being able to finish it, but it's his mistress that stumbles across her work in the pool house. She heralds it as genius, and the two even share a moment, but the situation is obviously a betrayal, not just for Arthur's cheating, but also for allowing her to see her work in the first place. He didn't respect her work is the point. The art was personal, meant only for her and really nobody else, which is totally cool too. Again, art takes on many forms. In the aftermath, she burns down the pool house along with all the work within, starting over from scratch. Ultimately, we see she does indeed finish the comic and reunites with Arthur to show him the work. Kirsten is there too and is curious about it, Arthur describing the spaceman as the man who ruined his life. Well, you kind of really did it to yourself, but it was in part thanks to that experience that Miranda was able to finally complete her work and move on. Also importantly was how she didn't care one way or another if her comic had a grand impact, yet that appears to be the case anyway. Little Kirsten was gifted a copy when Arthur and Miranda met, and we also learned later that another copy was left behind. Kirsten in a lot of ways was shaped by what she read in the comic, which again is Miranda's own personal journey. Art that speaks to her. It's all about dealing with the tragedies that befall us and how we deal with it. Certainly the girls can relate in this way, and they establish them in a kind of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern way. Two people, but they are interchangeable in their trauma. But there's also that second copy. Could someone else have received it and had a similar eye-opening experience as Kirsten? We'll see. Finally, in a very different but still extremely connected perspective, we have the seemingly almighty Arthur, who might be the most intriguing of the complex characters. There's a sort of aura emanating from his presence that ripples throughout the story, and he is the most successful by far of the bunch, at least popularity-wise. Although he actually dies from a supposed heart attack in his first appearance on screen at the theater, making his impact after the fact even more impressive. He is said to have begun his career toiling in theater for many years, but was able to move onto or transcend into blockbuster movies, where he grew substantially in stature and wealth. I mean, the dream of any actor, right? Yet it is not that simple. As for him, art is treated with the most disdain out of all the characters. He acknowledges the clunkiness of a previous hits movie's title and dismisses his latest script as total trash. All he cares about is another fat payday to upkeep his lavish lifestyle, worrying more about box office grosses, not the quality of the material. While it is still technically art in its own way, it is fluff and meaningless, which definitely speaks volumes in regards to films nowadays. Even though he's successful, it's also established that he's pretty much a tool, not just for being an actor for a payday, but of course cheating on his wife, even if their marriage was just for publicity in the first place. In spite of this nature, he still was able to inspire something real in others, for both Kirsten and Miranda, proving he too had worth in the end. It was thanks to the comic that Kirsten found her way to move on from her own trauma, which of course was inspired by Miranda's own hardships. That's also the point of art, using it as an outlet for life, as an expression of our feelings. Remember back with the Greeks? That's what we're trying to do here. Catharsis and stuff, it all ties together. I don't quite know where the show is heading in its remaining episodes, but I did see the sneak peek for episode 4. At one point, a new visitor descends upon the traveling symphony. Despite initially seeming like a fan, it seems that he has more ulterior motives. He quotes the Station 11 comic, "To the monsters, we are the monsters," and Kirsten is worried that he's shown up to disrupt her family. As far as she knows, no one else has seen the comic. He threatens the troops' lives, and that's enough for Kirsten to attempt to murder him. To her horror, she she discovers that he survives, and in that promo we see a flyer of his face describing him as the Prophet. I'd wager that he does have another copy of the comic, and has kind of created a cult based on its teachings. Perhaps the Prophet is actually Arthur's son Tyler, all grown up, that he has with his second wife. He mentions in the past that his son would love the comic, and Miranda hands over that second copy, which is also interesting. Again, Miranda's comic she didn't care if anyone saw winds up having a much bigger impact than expected. We see in many ways in the show the importance of art and the impact that it has on our characters as well as the world at large. It's very interesting. Well, that wraps up things for now, and I'm excited to see more of the show as it rolls out. Each episode has been an unexpected new puzzle piece into the grander story, and I cannot wait to see what comes next. Thanks again to the folks at HBO Max for sponsoring this video, and make sure to sign up if you want to check out Station 11 along with a bunch of other great stuff. Have you guys checked out Station 11? What did you guys think so far? Where do you see the story going? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow. Thanks for watching FoundFlix. See you next time.